Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really ancient story, but one that honestly feels surprisingly relevant. We're talking about feeling heard, about those times you're just waiting, and about how big moments actually unfold.
hmm And we're zooming in on just two verses today, Genesis 16, verses 15 and 16. They often get glossed over.
Right, but they're not just tying up loose ends. We think they act as this really profound pause in the story, a moment that wraps things up, but also sort of subtly points towards a massive shift coming in the Abrahamic journey.
Exactly. It's packed with significance.
So our goal in this deep dive is to really unpack that. We'll look at some clever Hebrew wordplay, a name that's basically a theological statement, and what a simple age reference actually tells us.
Yeah, we want to show you how these couple of lines hint at much bigger ideas, like God paying attention, and how grand plans sometimes unfold really slowly, even silently.
It feels like uncovering something hidden in plain sight. These verses, they manage to wrap up one part of the story quite neatly, giving characters their due, but they also plant seeds for what's coming next.
It's like the author takes a deliberate breath, preparing us, the readers, for the next big reveal. It's great narrative technique.
A narrative breath, I like that. Okay, so let's start with verse 15, with Ishmael's birth and his name. It says, Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. What strikes you first about how Hagar's role is mentioned there?
Well, the Hebrew phrasing itself is interesting. Waddled, Hagar lavram bean. Hagar bore to Abram a son. It might seem small, but in ancient genealogies, especially those tracking the father's line, mothers often get minimal mention, if any.
Okay, so just naming her explicitly is significant.
It is. The fact that the text clearly states she bore the son, waddled Hagar, it actually gives her a degree of dignity and emphasis that wasn't always standard for someone in her position in that society. It tells us her part matters here.
That's a powerful distinction, setting her apart from the norm. Okay, but then it's Abram who names the child Ishmael, Yishmael. Naming often signals authority, right? So what's Abram doing here? Is he just claiming the child?
Well, yes and no. Naming does often carry that weight of authority. But if you remember just a few verses earlier, in verse 11, the angel of the Lord specifically told Hagar, "You shall call his name Ishmael."
Oh, right. I'd forgotten that detail.
So when Abram names him, Wakra Avram Shambonch, he's not just acting on his own. He's actually aligning himself with that divine instruction. It's less about asserting his own authority and more an act of obedience, really. He's accepting the name heaven provided.
So it's him confirming the divine message Hagar received? That adds another layer?
Exactly. It suggests he's acknowledging and sort of internalizing what happened with Hagar in the wilderness.
And the name itself, Yishmael. You mentioned it's a theological statement. It means God hears. That seems hugely significant given everything that just happened.
Hugely significant. It's not just a name. It's like a recurring proclamation woven into their daily life. Think about it every single time Abram calls his son Ishmael.
He's saying God hears.
Precisely. He's inadvertently declaring God hears over and over. It becomes this constant audible reminder echoing through their camp. It perfectly captures the theme of the chapter. Sarai feeling unheard, Hagar suffering her cry, and then God Shama, God hearing her. The name basically crystallizes the whole point.
Wow. So it's the theological punchline lived out daily. You also mentioned a kind of shared ownership of the name.
Yeah, I think that's a neat way to see it. God reveals a name, right? But reveals it to Hagar. Hagar hears it and carries it. And then Abram confirms it through the act of naming. So you've got the divine source, the marginalized woman who received the promise, and the patriarch all participating in this declaration. God hears.
That's beautiful. It shows God's attention isn't just on Abram, but extends to Hagar, too, even in her distress.
Absolutely. It underlines that God is listening, even to those who feel completely pushed aside. It's a powerful assurance embedded right there in the name.
Okay, that's incredibly rich for just one name. So we have this profound statement in Ishmael's name. Then verse 16 hits us with something very concrete. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Why bother with the specific age? Why is that detail important here?
Well, it might seem like just, a biographical fact, but these age markers in Genesis are doing real narrative work. The Hebrew was precise. Ben Shimnim Washan Shiena, 86 years old.
So it's not just trivia.
Not at all. Think of them like signposts. They frame the whole covenant story, helping you, the listener, track time, understand the rhythm of events, and crucially, feel the passage of time in God's plan. They mark moments of significance, sometimes moments of action, and sometimes, like here, they set up a period of waiting.
And this specific signpost, Abram at 86, it points towards a really noticeable gap, doesn't it? Because the very next chapter, Genesis 17, jumps forward quite a bit.
It jumps forward 13 years. In Genesis 17.1, Abram is suddenly 99 years old when God reappears and reaffirms the promise, specifically about Isaac this time.
13 years? That's a long silence. What do you think that felt like for Abram? What are the human implications of God seemingly going quiet for over a decade?
Imagine that. 13 years. We get anxious after a few days of feeling like our prayers aren't answered, right?
Yeah.
For Avery, this was over a decade with no new word from God, the God who had promised him descendants. And remember, he's just named his son God Hears, based on divine instruction. He had every reason to believe, okay, this is it. Ishmael is the promised child.
He's raising this boy, living with the daily reminder God hears.
Exactly. For 13 years, Ishmael is the living proof of God's faithfulness, the tangible result of the promise. Abram probably settled into that reality, thinking the plan was unfolding through Ishmael, especially during those long, quiet years.
That name, God hears, must have been a source of comfort, maybe even confirmation for him during that silence. Like, see, God heard, and here's the result.
Very likely. It would seem entirely logical for him to conclude that Ishmael was the fulfillment. But for us, reading the story, knowing what's coming.
It creates suspense.
Right. While Abram might be thinking, okay, settled, the narrative is building tension for you. You know Isaac is still part of the picture. You know God's plan isn't finished. This gap, this silence, it's actually a clever narrative device. It foreshadows that there's more to come, that God's work isn't done yet. It makes you lean in wondering, how is God going to resolve this? When will God speak again?
That's fantastic storytelling using silence to build anticipation. Okay, so looking back at chapter 16 as a whole, it really does feel like it ties things up quite elegantly. Hagar's story gets this moment of divine attention and dignity. Ishmael gets this powerful name. Abram's age sets the timeline. It feels complete in a way.
It does feel like a pause, like a narrative breath, as you said. Chapter 16 closes neatly. It gives resolution to this specific part of the drama involving Hagar and the birth of Ishmael. And the language itself is quite simple, almost rhythmic in the Hebrew. We de Hagar, Hagar bore, from Abram named Dunsham, 86 years old. It has this cadence of closure.
But you're saying this simple structure, this neat ending, is actually packed with hints about what's next. It's pregnant with foreshadowing?
I think so, yes. It's a wonderful example of Hebrew narrative skill, because think about the main theme that emerges at the end of chapter 16. It's all about God hears, right? Summed up in Ishmael's name.
Right. God heard Hagar.
And then immediately after this pause, after 13 years where the dominant theme for Abram might have been God hears through his son, how does chapter 17 open?
It opens with God appearing to Abram again, with God speaks. Wow.
Exactly. God hears in chapter 16 leads directly into God speaks in chapter 17. That transition is deliberate, it's powerful, it shows this dynamic of the divine relationship. God listens, even in silence, and then God responds. God initiates the next step. It tells you something profound about how the covenant unfolds.
That pairing is just brilliant. And it also creates this sense of irony, doesn't it? Thinking back to how the chapter started, Sarai felt overlooked, saying, "The Lord has restrained me from bearing children."
Yes. That's such a key contrast. The chapter begins with human pain, a feeling of being unheard, restrained by God. But it ends with this undeniable affirmation embedded in a child's name that God does hear.
So it highlights the gap between our perception and God's reality.
Precisely. Our limited view versus God's broader, attentive presence. God is working, listening, even when we feel stuck or ignored. And it broadens the scope, too. The blessing isn't just about Abram and Sarai anymore. God's hearing extends to Hagar, the Egyptian slave woman. It shows God's attentiveness reaches even the marginalized within this covenant story. The seed of blessing is already growing in unexpected ways even before Isaac arrives.
What an amazing amount of meaning packed into just 2 short verses. We've really unpacked Ishmael's name, God hears, as more than a label, but a living declaration. We've seen how Abram's age marks those crucial 13 silent years, building suspense. And we've highlighted that beautiful narrative bridge from God hears to God speaks.
Yeah, it's a reminder, isn't it? That even when things seem quiet, when it feels like nothing's happening in our own lives, there might be a deeper story unfolding. God might be listening, working, preparing for the next word, even if we can't perceive it yet.
It definitely challenges our need for constant feedback or immediate answers, which leads to maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on this week.
Mhm.
If Abram lived for 13 years, likely believing Ishmael was the promised child, raising him under the banner of God hears while God remains silent, what does that suggest to us about patience, about our own expectations of how and when divine plans should unfold?
That's a great question.
What might we be missing or perhaps misinterpreting during our own silent years? Those times when we're waiting and the heavens seem quiet, what assumptions are we making?
Definitely something to reflect on. How do we navigate those periods of waiting and perceived silence?
Exactly. Plenty to think about there. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us on this exploration.